Hey guys, welcome back. Today I'm going to be doing my full review of Rogue. Now, I think it's safe to say this episode was scandalous both in the episode and for the viewers themselves, but that's what I enjoyed about it so much. So, without no further ado, let's get into the video and see what my thoughts are. Starting with the Doctor and Ruby, as usual, they gave great performances. Now, Ruby, she really did give off Clara vibes for me in this episode, and she did have some great comebacks. And also, I thought she really showed, as if she didn't already in 73 Yards, how she doesn't need the Doctor to defend herself. Like with the Cholder, she used the earrings to save herself and to sort of fight the Cholder. So I really love how she isn't some sort of damsel in distress, and she doesn't actually need the Doctor to save herself. So that's what I really loved about Ruby. Like she did with Star Trek and Strictly, I feel like she manifested Bridgerton in this episode. But I do like how she enjoyed it and she enjoyed the drama and all the books falling on her at the bookshelf. That was a great scene. And I'm also quite surprised she was allowed to say posh knobs. But either way, it was great to hear that. And some great advice that she had from her foster mum was, if it ain't your life, why are you telling it? I just feel like that's a great piece of advice. So Ruby did really excel in this episode, even though it wasn't mainly about her, this one. The Doctor gave some absolutely brilliant performances, which I'll be delving into individually later, but on the whole, as usual, he gave a great job. I liked how we saw a vast range of the Doctor in this episode. We saw anger, we saw sorrow, we saw fun, we saw flirting, we saw everything, so I really did like that, and I liked his mini speech with all the faces revolving around him. And it was also nice to see the 13th Doctor in that as well, because this is sort of the first time we've actually seen her since she regenerated. The Cholders were such great villains as well, because I really loved how they were, even the small elements like their blinking, I liked how they added that in post-production, and their sort of like twitches with the noises. I felt it felt very alien but very bird-like, so I really liked those additions to it. Not only that, but I loved how they sort of played on Scandal and would revolve around Scandal. That was quite funny. And not only that, but sort of them, how they drain the people with the electricity and the drained corpses. I really did like that. So all of these additions to the actual villains themselves were great to see, and I just thought these were great villains for this episode. The way they spoke and behaved was very camp as well, but I feel like that's what Russell T Davies wanted to do, and actually I think it's more fun that way. I also loved how they were cosplaying, and that was such a big nod to fans. I really like that addition, because now there's an episode for them about cosplay, which I really enjoyed as well. And it wasn't only that, the TV signals going out to space and aliens seeing that, that's so funny, and that's why they went there. So I just love that as well, because it just makes this episode so much more Bridgerton. So such a nice thing to say. And actually, they all did well, but Indira Varma especially, she did such a phenomenal job with actually acting like a Cholder. It's genuinely believable that she was an alien. So I thought she in particular did such a great job with the Cholder. This episode had very few faults, but one of the ones that I did spot originally the first time round was, if the Cholders liked scandal and drama, then why did the Cholder originally pick the maid slash cleaner to go for? It would make sense if it sort of explained that she sort of picked them to sort of worm her way through up to the Duchess, but considering that was never explained, it just doesn't make sense to me. But again, this is literally one of the only faults of the episode. The psychedelic earrings were a nice invention, and I really liked how Ruby used them to fight off the Cholder, because I generally thought Ruby was done for, and I really like how these earrings go beyond just sort of a convenient excuse as to how they can dance like that. I liked how they were sort of used in the plot and used by Ruby to stop the Cholder, and also it wasn't only dancing with precision it helped them with, Ruby did so well to actually act like a Cholder as well, so I really like how that was used beyond just a convenient excuse. For me, in this episode, it wasn't only the third Doctor's coat that was sort of a callback from the Doctor's costume in this episode, it was also his mention of 1902 and accidentally inventing tarmac. Now, other Doctors have done this before, but with me, it reminded me of the 13th Doctor, because she always used to tend to sort of drop names and drop things that she accidentally half invented. So I really liked how that was sort of a callback to the 13th Doctor, and I just really enjoyed that line. Susan Twist's appearance in this I thought was a nice inclusion, because it was great to see her not actually in person but in a picture. It's something slightly different to what we've seen before, and it's great to sort of not have her included, because she doesn't always necessarily need to have some sort of dialogue. It's just nice to see a picture and Ruby to recognise her, and just remind the fans of the sort of thread that's running through this series. So I really like that inclusion. Now, I have to say this, but this episode was probably one of the best looking episodes of the whole show ever. I just thought certain shots looked absolutely beautiful, and it was so stellar. The flowers, the candles, some of these shots look absolutely incredible, and they really did amazing with it. It's probably one of the highlights of the episode. I just thought it looked absolutely incredible, and they did such an amazing job with it. Just speaking about Rogue's ship for now, I really did like that, and I thought the inside was quite like a TARDIS, and I sort of liked how it was sort of a reference to how similar he was to the Doctor. But I liked how his ship was slightly different, darker, more dirty. So I liked how it was slightly different. It's like opposite sort of thing. So I really liked that, and I thought the column of light actually in the middle of the sort of TARDIS-like ship itself was quite a cool addition. I'd love to see that in an actual TARDIS itself. And also the triform voice, it made a nice change from a sort of futuristic, clear, clean sounding voice. It was sort of rough, and I just really liked how it just sounded slightly different to the usual type of futuristic voice for a sort of certain machine would actually get. So I really liked that inclusion as well. Also, speaking of the ships, one of my favourite scenes of the episode itself was the Kylie Minogue scene. You could see Ncuti and the Doctor were having fun with it, and it was just such a fun scene, and nice to have the inclusion of music again. It wasn't only that, but I liked how the Doctor was sort of singing the Willy Wonka song as Rogue entered his ship, but unfortunately there was no sign of the unknown. Aside from all the obvious things, the one thing that really reminded me of Rogue and Captain Jack was the psychic paper scene, where the Doctor hands over the psychic paper and his mind goes astray. It really reminds me of when Rose first met Captain Jack in his ship with the psychic paper, so I really like that as well. And just before this scene as well, the Rogue actually mentioned to the boss, could this be the same boss that the Meat mentioned? For the second time, this sound sort of popped up with the TARDIS where it's sort of grumbling, like it did in The Devil's Cord, and it seems to only happened in episodes of the past. Maybe that's just a coincidence, but I definitely feel like it's got something to do with something wrong with the TARDIS, which I feel like we'll be finding out next week, which I'm really looking forward to. The dancing and proposing scene between the Doctor and Rogue, even though it's taking place in 1813, although we're watching it in 2024 set in 1813, I still feel like it's quite groundbreaking, but that's a great thing to see, and I think that's what Russell T Davies wanted to do, but again, it just works so well. I've spoke about the Kylie Minogue scene being one of my favourites, but some others of my favourites was the chase scene between the Cholders and the Doctor and Rogue. And not only that, I also liked it when the Doctor thought Ruby actually died, because I like the flashback of him speaking to her foster mum and actually saying all those years that they live is a long time to suffer. It really gave me sort of the Fury of the Time Lord vibes. And it was great to see that as well, because I feel like not only was that the only reference to the episode in this actual episode, but also the family, sort of alien family, working together. It really did remind me of the Family of Blood. So that was a nice callback. And speaking of Series 3 again, it wasn't only that I thought was a callback, but also the Drain Corpses really reminds me of the sort of Lazarus experiment. I've already said about the Cholders actors' performances, but really they need another shout out because they just did so well. And that scene with the vicar and everything, him calling her birdiness and creatures from hell, that whole scene is just so fun and just so enjoyable, so it needed a mention of its own. Now, a lot have speculated that this was originally the second episode, but I'm not too sure on that. What it could be in a way, because the only thing Ruby actually mentioned was the space babies. And then in The Devil's Cord, her time was June, July, which is sort of about now. So that could make sense. But then again, what makes me feel like this wasn't originally the second episode is she recognised Susan Twist. She wouldn't have recognised Susan Twist in the second episode by now. She would have only recognised them, say, after Boom. So again, I'm not too sure whether this was the second episode. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Something I noticed, which probably not many of us did spot, was the use of the noise from the Sanctuary base when he was sending the ship round the moon. That is such a small thing to notice, but I did hear that first time round and thought, am I just hearing things? Then the second time round I did notice it. So a very small thing, but that's how you know I'm a big Doctor Who fan. Something which hasn't really got anything to do with this episode, it's more the series in general, was I don't feel like we've seen a lot of the Doctor and Ruby together. They do have this sort of close, like, friendship, best friends as they describe it. But if you think about it, we haven't seen a great deal of it. Now, Boom, she did spend quite a large part actually dead. And then you have 73 Yards, which of course, except two scenes, was just Ruby. Then you've got Dot and Bubble, which they weren't really interacting much. And with this episode, Rogue, they were sort of separate. She was sort of doing her own thing, he was with Rogue, so I don't feel like we've seen them bonding as much. It might change, but considering we're getting a new companion in the next series, I don't feel like we've seen enough of them together. Now, finally talking about the main part of the episode was the relationship between Rogue and the Doctor, and I really did enjoy this. You could sort of see where the connection is first made, where the Doctor says fast mover. Also, though, during their sort of conversations, he said no to Doc. But has he forgotten Graham, who literally called him Doctor all the time except one occasion? So that was quite cool to see. And yeah, I really did like how they had this sort of connection as well. They've lost people. So again, it sort of brings them together. But the whole relationship was very believable. And you really did feel like they fell for each other, which makes the last scene with them all the more sadder. So I feel like they pulled this off really well. Rogue himself was a great character, and I really do hope we see him in the future, and I feel like he's a great replacement for Jack if it's ever needed. But Rogue himself did a great performance, and just between him and the Doctor and their sort of relationship, it was really great to see, and I thought they did it so well. It was great of Rogue to sacrifice himself and to see Ruby sort of accepting her fate, naturally being sad about it, but sort of accepting her fate like Clara would. And it was great to see that the Doctor actually couldn't do it, even though he knew it would be for the best. He couldn't actually do it, and it was lovely of Rogue to actually step in and save Ruby, but also save the Doctor in a way from all that pain as well. And it was great that they actually got to kiss, because it was sort of like their connection just before he sort of disappeared and said, "Find me," and I really hope the Doctor does. And it was also nice of Ruby to actually acknowledge the Doctor's pain and tell him to actually sort of realise it instead of just sort of moving on and sort of burying it, because that is only going to make things worse. So it was lovely to see them sort of acknowledge it and then him sort of come to terms with it and accept it. So it was a great ending to the episode. Also, right at the end of the TOD sequence, it was lovely to see the addition of William Russell and it being dedicated to him. It was great to see that as well, because he only passed away a few days ago, so they literally had to add this in last minute. But I'm really glad they did, because it's such a nice sort of touch for William Russell. In total, this was an absolutely brilliant episode with so few faults, and for me, is up there with this series with The Devil's Court and 73 Yards, and possibly Dot and Bubble, but with so many few faults. It just generally is such an enjoyable episode, and I never thought about my ranking originally, but actually I think I'm going to have to give it a 9 out of 10, which is the highest I've done of this series so far. It's just so fun, so enjoyable, with so few faults, and it's just going to be such a great episode to go back and watch all of the time. So yeah, I just thought this was such a great episode, and I'm going to have to rank this the highest out of the whole series. As always, thanks to everyone who put their voting in the poll. The majority seem to love it with 50%. Then you have sort of about 25% that like it, and then 25% that either hate it or dislike it. But what I'd love to know is what you guys think. What did you think of the episode? Let me know in the comments below. And again, as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and hopefully see you in my next video soon. Thank you all for watching, and take care.